Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the digital platform of Sreetanwi Mohammed. And I hope you're well. And I'm back with the session number 12. As you know, the Department of English Sreetanwi Mohammed has been organizing a special lecture series. And in this special lecture series, several distinguished guests already delivered their precious, insightful lectures. I'm back today with session number 12 that I already have mentioned. And in this special session, we have a special guest. And who is with me? I am taking our very special, distinguished guest on the screen. Then I'm just telling about her. And then I will welcome our Honorable Ma'am to begin the lecture. But before doing all this thing, I'm welcoming our Honorable Ma'am, distinguished guest on our digital platform. So,
Good evening.
Ma'am, we have today Sreetanwi Chakraborty, and she is an of assistant professor in the Department of Amity Institute of English Studies and Research, Amity University, Kolkata. And the thing that why she is very in our very short period, she has done so many works, national, international works. Not only that, she has delivered her precious lecture in several digital platform as well as physically. She also delivers several lectures, and those lectures are very insightful and very intriguing too. And apart from this thing, she also edits one web journal that is Light Infinite. If I'm wrong, is it correct that what I say?
No,
Uh,
it's Lit Infinite. Yes, it's a journal
Lit
on.
is
It's a
bilingual
bilingual journal. Yes,
bilingual journal. Sorry.
on
So
arts literature and the social sciences, and it's both online and offline.
okay, both online and offline. So we are very fortunate to have you on our platform. And before you commence your lecture, then first of all, I would like to convey my heartfelt thanks to you for accepting our invitation. So, ma'am, if you have anything else to say about our venture, then we'd like to have a few words from you. Then we'll commence your lecture.
Thank you so much. This was indeed a very warm welcome that I received from the Department of English. Thanks to the department from Sadhan Chandra Mahavidyalaya, and special thanks to Professor Gautam Majhi, who has been organizing this eclectic series, who has been organizing this all throughout and bringing in so insightful and resourceful discussions to one web platform. So I'm really happy to join you once again, as a part of the web platform, because right now we don't have any such sources of deliverance apart from this web platforms only, and web series and lecture series. So if we can impart something as part of the larger spaces of academia, then I'll really consider myself to be lucky. So I love to be a part of this platform. Thank you so much.
Okay, we are lucky to have you on our platform. So before she starts delivering her precious lecture, then I would like to tell you the topic that she is going to deal with today. She is going to deliver a lecture on the topic that is on your screen: transit lounge, reading, cityscapes, performance, and urban narratives in Indian English plays. This is a topic that she is going to deal with. But before see, this is the last thing that I'll interrupt you before you deliver a lecture. That before she delivers, she commences. That insightful lecture, that I would like to inform all of you who are watching me right now that if you have any question, don't you think that you can't ask? Definitely, you can ask this question. You can drop your question in the comment box of this page. That means where this video is going. And after our lecture, I'll take all the questions to her, and she will answer all the questions, queries, whatever you have. So on this note, I would like to just give this total session over to you, ma'am, and I'll come back after your lecture with the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just got so afraid because it started with such a warm welcome, and then we talked so much about the question answer session. Anyway, thank you, Professor Gautam Majhi, for such warm welcome. So I'll be speaking on this, as Sir told, this is about the transit lounge thing and the idea of the cityscapes, the narratives, and the special things on the urban landscape that we're talking about in case of Indian English plays. Now, very importantly, if we just divide the session, or rather divide the topic that we have taken for today, we particularly take up three things. One is transit lounge, the particular term that is used, and second is why and how we are talking about the cityscape. cityscapes as the part of the narrative, taking up performance also as a part of the Indian English plays, because when we talk about performance, we insist not just on reading the script, but how to take the script and then transform it to the act. So how we are taking from text to stage in case of Indian English play, because when we speak of drama, we are no longer talking about the acting part as such, but we are taking up the theoretical segment and also the script as such. But when we are taking it to the play on stage, we are essentially taking up the performance in a large portion of the narrative. Third part that we are introducing or we will take up, that will be the urban narratives, and why and how the urban narratives they become very relevant in the large scale domain of what we see in the post 1970s phase in case, or post 1960s, when we as such see the English speaking and people, the part of the audience who are largely into the domain of understanding English as a language and understanding English plays, or those plays which have been translated largely into English, when we take up that segment. So specifically, cityscapes, when we talk about urbanization, it is, or urban narratives when we are taking up, it is largely, to a large extent, it is related to the cityscape. And why exactly do we read, or what exactly do we read as part of the cityscape? Obviously, all those plays, all those themes, all those techniques in Indian English drama, and also the translated plays, Indian English plays which have been part of the translation and which have been transferred onto the stage as part of the larger audience who are based in the city. So we are talking about the metropolis, the drama in the metropolis, the plays that have been performed in the metropolis, and what were some of the changes, what were some of the socio-economic impacts, the large vistas that are opened up in terms of the political rigorousness, the political complexities that came up in the post-colonial period, in the post-independence period also. That is very precisely that we are aiming at. And we have a host of writers, host of playwrights who are dealing with, who are experimenting with themes that are related to these city spaces. So if we take the city as a part of the drama script, we are not just taking up the city as a form of locale or a site, S-I-T-E, if we just take up the spelling. So if we are just taking up the locale or the site as a part of the narrative or as a part of the urban landscape or the cityscape, so as to say, we can understand how the city itself, in most of the plays that we read, in most of the urban narratives that are being generated to us as a part of the reading of the play, as a part of the performance, as a part of the larger reading and rereading and representation of the dramatic techniques on stage, we find that the cityscapes, they are not just, as I told, locales for performance or the sites, but the cities and the urban landscapes, they themselves, they almost become a character in the play that we are reading. In many of the plays we find 1990s, post 1980s, and in fact, if we just go back to the decadal growth, or rather, if we just go back to the years, the 10 years gap or the 10 years leap that we are taking up. So post 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, the high impact that we find, the deep and rigorous socio-political impact, the socio-religious impact, the community building process that goes on, and obviously the kind of disparities, the kind of hierarchies that we find in the larger domains of the city space. So the city growing, the metropolis growing, and also the people who are growing more myopic as and when the metropolis is growing to a large extent. So if we are talking about the urban narratives as part of the reading of the drama or the representation of the plays in Indian English drama, that segment, we are also looking at that particular urban narrative which is dealing with the metropolitan myopia, something that we find as a part of the postmodern human condition, something that we find in the typical area of rootlessness, alienation, the displacement of values, the displacement of ideas, the displacement of dreams, and of course, the shattering of all the erstwhile aspirations that a country, that a nation, that a body of people, that a community and that a segment of population they harbored before the independence, or rather the kind of dreams that they nurtured as and when India was not in the stage of independence. So urban narratives, they do not just talk about the picture of the cities. Say we are talking about the metropolis, the plays that were performed, the plays that were written for Bombay segment, or the Parsi theatre, if we talk about that, specifically taking up the Parsi theatre and the dimension of the Parsi theatre. And again, when we take up the theatre in Kolkata, if we take up the audience and the spectatorship, the ratio of acceptance, and as far as spectatorship is concerned, how far the urban narratives they become so very non-compartmentalized and compartmentalized at the same time. Because with gradual changing, what comes in, what sets in, is a form of dramatic experimentation. And what initially ensues as a kind of thrilling experience for the people, what initially ensues as a form of that domain where people try to go and delve deeper into the nuanced patterns of the changing landscape of a post-independent society, that slowly and gradually becomes very complicated when we start reading the cityscapes or start reading the literary narratives, the script narratives, and also as a part of the non-generated or the non-played part of the fictional narratives of Indian English drama, that part. So we talk about cityscapes, performance, and also urban narratives, the three, and how they are constantly intertwined. So there is a very rich interconnection that we find among these three segments that we talk about. One is cityscape, one is performance, how the performance is carried on as a part of the cityscape. That cityscape can be an audience, a part of audience who occupies a part of the city, and that cityscape can also be how the city is represented in the setting, in the plot, in the background, in between the dialogue. So this can actually be considered to be a coalescence of all the three segments together, if we take up. Now, by those cityscapes first, what exactly, which are those points that we take up, and how to move on with the urban narrative? First of all, when we talk about the cityscape, we are not just talking about a city or a particular segment of, say, urban elite population, so as to say, or when we talk about the people who are reading English literature or going to watch Indian English plays or Indian plays in English translation. But we also take into consideration, when we talk about cityscapes, certain other factors which are interrelated again. We take up number one, the literary segment. Number two, we also take up the ethnographical pursuits when we deal with the Indian English plays. We take up the ethnographical pursuits as well. We take up urban studies, the urban ladder, the hierarchical procedure that is enshrined in most of these Indian English plays and Indian English drama narratives. So we see urban studies also. Urban studies as in, we talk about the office going lot, we talk about the people who are doing business, we talk about different professions like lawyers, doctors, dancers, and people who are from other backgrounds as well. And we definitely talk about a certain portion which is the urban elite. But we take up the classes which are educated, which are, part of part of that particular branding process that goes on as a part of the larger post-colonial narrative. That branding process called urbanization. That branding process called globalization. Again, in the post-1990s plays, if we see, or in the post-1990 Indian English drama, this particular branding process becomes extremely coherent and also extremely, conspicuous, larger to see in domain. So we have in this particular study, literary part, we have the ethnographic part, we have the urban studies as a part of the narrative, we have the human and the cultural geography also, which is taken as a part of the consideration. So we take up the topography, we take up geography. When we take up this urban space, we talk of a specific space, space in drama, space in theater, space in larger context of setting up of the theatrical script, if we see that, or if we just take up what is meant by that space, what is meant by that locale, what is meant by that site that we are talking about, SITE. So that is the site that we are talking about. Also, cities, in the words of Doreen Massey, I'll just refer to Doreen Massey, who worked on cityscapes and also architectural part and architectural reverberations in literature. So, Doreen Massey, he says that the cityscapes and the cities to be in general, he says that these are the intersections of multiple narratives. So when we talk about urban narratives, whether we are talking about the street theater, the plays that are as part of the proscenium landscape, the plays that are part of the rigorous pattern of representing or getting represented as part of the larger improvisational theater, improvisational aspects and improvisational pursuits when we talk about performance. So we take all these multiple narratives into consideration. So non-singularity of pattern is what we see that intertwines all the three elements together. So if we are taking cityscapes, if we are taking performance, and if we are taking urban narratives at the same time, simultaneously, if we are watching all three of them, we find that all the three are intertwined and there is a very non-linear, abrupt, and also incoherent progression at one particular or two particular points of time where we see that it is either the cityscape or the narrator or the combination of both or else the character, the narrator and the cityscape that coalesce into a kind of organized or a very dissipated whole. Either it's very organized or else to talk about the existential dilemma, to talk about the identity crisis, to talk about the kind of disparate mechanisms that are constantly at work for all the viewers, for all the part of the audience, for all the part of the actors. This creates a kind of negation of all the erstwhile values and moralities and structures of seeing or looking at the city that is undergoing a major change. So even that is reflected as a part of the performance that we are seeing. So when we see the urban landscape, when we see the urban narrative, when we see the cityscape pattern, these things are also to be taken into consideration. The second thing, when we come to urban narratives or reading urban narratives and cityscapes, there is one particular term that is given. We all know when we talk about Foucault's theory as a part of the literary theory, and a specific portion where Michel Foucault he talks about the theory of heterotopology. And what does he say in that particular form? Foucault uses the term heterotopias to explain the speciality of cities. So when we talk about the urban landscape, when we talk about a narrative that is deeply embedded within the city, say in Mahesh Dattani's plays, we are talking about a Gujarati family and essentially in many of the plays, say we take up Bravely for the Queen or we take up any other play, Final Solution if we take up, essentially we are catering or we are looking at a landscape that is solely guided by the city principle, the city dwelling, the city dwellers, the life of the city dwellers, the educated mass or else it's the business class that we are looking at. So when Foucault talks about the term heterotopias, he says he talks about the speciality of cities. And what is that? What are heterotopias? Foucault argues heterotopias have the ability to juxtapose spaces belonging to a lost past with those of the present through simulations or extravagant fictions that recreate the past almost appearing to be live and transfixed in eternity. He observes the heterotopia is capable of juxtaposing in a single real place several places, several sites that are in themselves incompatible. Now, this itself, the concept of heterotopia itself, it is very multifaceted. If we see, if we look at it as a kind of uh, pursuit that we are taking it in the deeper aspects of understanding performance and all the nuanced patterns of the city drama, or so as to say the urban narrative, heterotopia, it clearly talks about the capability of juxtaposition. What is the juxtaposition taking into consideration? Either a single real place or else it's also taking single real place along with several places taken together which are several sites that are in themselves incompatible. And therefore what we find in Indian English drama or while reading Indian English plays or the script of Indian English plays, what we find due to this juxtaposition There is an alternative hierarchy that is being created, one. Secondly, due to this jostling nature of these city spaces that people are huddling in as a part of the city space, people, their dreams, their aspirations, as I keep on saying, and people as a part of becoming the face of the city. So people wearing masks, people who are not wearing masks, the masked existence in the city and the unmasked narrative that is also given as a part of the same juxtaposition. So this creates a kind of alternative site and also several sites that are constantly jostling for space, for recognition, for inclusion as a part of a cohesive urban narrative, which is never possible in case of Indian English drama. So as to say, so if we take up Mahesh Kunchwar's plays or say Pratap Sharma when he writes the plays, which are essentially stocked, in Bombay, the narratives that are in Ezekiel also for a large part, not just in his poetry, but Ezekiel as part of his drama also, the three major plays that he wrote. They are so very deeply rooted, so very deeply embedded as part of the Bombay landscape. And the Bombay becomes the Bombay as a city, the Bombay that we see, it's almost as palpable, not just as a city, but as palpable as almost a character that we find, almost a character that is coagulating deeper into the realms of the play or deeper into the realms of the drama that we are reading. In case of Pratap Sharma also, to a large extent. In case of Manish Dattani, we find Bombay, we find Bangalore in some parts, and in case of other writers saying where we talk a lot about the third theatre, the street theatre, and the spaces that are created through third theatre, we also talk about the city life, the city space, and all those recesses of the city that were perhaps earlier not discovered and that were not given such unique dimension as Badal Sarkar gave as part of his third theatre. So if we read Evam Indrajit or when we read Profession or when we read the other plays that we have by Badal Sarkar, we find that there is a very curious amalgamation of all those recesses which were not discovered earlier. Hence, the narrative, the urban landscape, the urban narratorial demand for the cityscape, that becomes more intense in its representation as a part of the Indian English drama, and which is obviously reflected not just through the text, not just through the script, not just through the play that has been written, but obviously through the performance. So we are seeing the characters becoming actors within a landscape, within a cityscape, within a cultural ethnography, within a geographical and topographical situation that is presented to them, or else they are becoming merely situational puppets which are part of the larger narrative of an urban response and how they are suddenly thrown into the vortex of the modern city, suddenly thrown into, the whirlpool, the gyrated feature that we have in case of the city. That is what we see in case of certain other variations. So juxtaposition by what Foucault has said or by what he talks about in heterotopia, if we take up, that juxtaposition remains very clear with definite patterns of temperamental endeavor on the part of the characters and also in the space, in the city life and also the dwellings of the urban individual. Also, when we talk about performance as a part of the narrative, transit lounge, I took the particular term transit lounge from Sonata. Sonata is a play by Mahesh Kunchwar, and as a part of the narrative, as a part of the script, there are three friends, the three women that we find in Sonata. One of them, they take the other friend's, she takes the other friend's house as a transit lounge. It's the place, the friend's house, the three friends congregate in one particular flat that is in metropolitan city. And she talks about how she waxes eloquent on the good things of life and how she vents out all her disgust and all her, agony, pain, and suffering as a part of the transit lounge where she can meet her friends. So that transit lounge in the city, that becomes a very important juncture. The transit lounge in Indian English plays, Indian English drama, this becomes a particular juncture, a particular point from which the action, the narration, and also the temperamental patterns and also the situational aspect of the plays, they undergo a drastic change. So if we see the onset of modernism, the kind of improvisational qualities that the modern plays are attuned to, and also the improvisational qualities that are given to the modern Indian English drama on stage as a part of performance, we see how this particular, cityscape, the talking about the cityscape, we talk about rhythmscape, we talk about landscape, and I talked about cityscape. So that coalition of cities, it's almost becoming a kind of kaleidoscope where you find not just the individual calamities, individual rigorous import of what has been happening in their lives in the pre-colonial phase and also in the colonial phase, but what has the newer import of the city life led to, what kind of degradation, what kind of alterations they have faced as a part of the cityscape, what kind of modifications have been done as part of the narrative. All this become highly, incongruent and sometimes very congruent with their lives, and that is reflected as a part of the urban narrative performance also, the urban performance on stage in Indian English drama when they are reflected on stage. So theater, when we see that, or when we talk about performance from the text or from the drama, we seriously come to a point which is about the action part. And by that time, we talk about the Indian English theater. By that time, we talk about the performance on stage of the Indian English plays. And what is that? It is a complex transaction that we see between what? The performer on the one side, and also we find the audience on the other side on very broader and simplistic terms. So whether it's the kind of performance that you expect in a city life, constantly toiling hard, people coming back from offices on a weekend going to watch a movie or watch a play being performed on, or watch a drama on stage. So whatever you say, it is also about the theatrical extension, theatrical cohesion, theatrical bonding, and the performance that is created as a transactional pattern between the audience and also between the spectator rather and the performer. That is what we look at as a part of the performance narrative or as a part of the performance portion in Indian English plays. And that also remains within the matrix of all the production devices. And by production devices, when we talk about cityscapes, urban narratives, and performance, what exactly do we mean by those production devices? We talk about the lights, we talk about the setting and the background, the sound system that is closely in consonance with the cityscape, the sound system that is closely associated as a part of feature of the cityscape or as a part of all the features that are related to cityscape. Sound system setting, the in earlier Greek plays, in earlier Greek dramas, what we read, we talked about the spectacle, we talked about the opsis. And now when we talk about the urban materialism, when we talk about the globalized perspective, even the setting, the landscape, even the cityscapes, they are represented as part of the performance, as part of the props and also the theatrical production. So it will be the characters on stage or the actors on stage, how it is the mise-en-scene pattern that is created, how are the urban elite class represented, what kind of props are used, what kind of experimentations do we do in case of light, in case of all the rigorous arrangement of patterns, of the subplot, how are the subplots created, is there a duality of narrative that is presented through the performance, is there a duality of props or the setting, or is the stage divided into two different halves or three different settings? How is the kitchen sink pattern related? How is the drawing room drama created? So all these become very important in terms of understanding the urban social milieu and how that is represented as a part of the urban dramatic landscape. Number three, if we specifically take up one quotation by Mahesh Dattani, we see Mahesh Dattani says when he was asked in an interview about what are the changes that he finds in the urbanity and also, the kind of city narratives that are part of his plays, and where he has been traveling a lot. He has been almost a globe trotter and also a city trotter, so as to say. So all the productions that he had from Bangalore, they have been performing elsewhere also in Kolkata, in almost all the major metropolitan cities, they have been performing. So Mahesh Bhattani, when he was asked about the lineage of understanding the city as a narrator, city as a creator, city as an actor, and also the city as one of the very palpable entities that we see in Indian English plays, he answers, I am practicing theatre in an extremely imperfect world. Dattani says, where the politics of doing theatre in English looms large over anything else one does. Where writing about the middle class is seen as unfashionable, I am certain that my plays are a true reflection of my time, place, and socio-economic background in a country that has a myriad challenges to face politically, socially, artistically, and culturally. So even from the perspective of understanding Transit Lounge and how and where a directorial venture and also how the writer or the director, he or she is giving rise to a particular pattern on stage, this consciousness of the urban landscape, this becomes very intense in case of production and performance of Indian English dramatic narratorial pattern. So if he says that I am practicing theatre in an extremely imperfect world where he talks about the politics of doing theatre in English looms large over anything else one does. Because we have to keep in mind that we are essentially not dealing with the colonizer's language that was almost thrust upon us at a certain period of time. I'm not going into that even because that would actually take a lot of time and that takes us back to Macaulay's minutes and everything and the introduction of English education and the major changes that occurred after that. But that will not be under this purview or under this discussion. So what we look at is obviously the kind of experimentation and the dualities and the kind of multiple or multifaceted nature that we see in terms of language. So the ultimate method also of dealing with a politicized version of performance, a politicized version of linguistic appeal, recreating that on stage, even that becomes very important here because what is fashionable, quote unquote, as he says, and what is unfashionable, again, as he says, as part of the discussion, that becomes very important for us and for any theatre going public, for any person who is watching a play or going through the script of the Indian English drama to see how that is represented in English. And specifically when we talk about English, we talk not just about the Indian English plays, but also we talk about all those plays that have been translated into English. A major part of Mahesh Elkunchwar's plays that were translated from Marathi into English, and also some, if we take up the case of Girish Karnad, there were plays which were translated from other language into English, like the South Indian languages that we have, for example. And at the same time, there were also plays that he wrote directly in English. Okay, and so if we take up Mr. Ezekiel also, it's the same thing. How and where he is representing all the plays as a part of the Indian English tradition and narrative. The fourth part that becomes important in the discussion of the cityscapes will be what is an urban audience in theatre? Because when we talk about performance, when we talk about the cityscapes and the narratives, so as to say, it also becomes important how we look at the urban audience. Over the decades, if there has been a change in the structural pattern of how the theatre has been, or how the theatre is undergoing a drastic modification, there is also a point where we look at or where we should look at the urban audience as a part of the changing or the altering scenario. So what exactly do we see or what do we decipher from the changing role of the urban audience in non-dramatic theatre specifically? We talk about two types of theatre. If we talk about Indian English theatre, we talk about the non-dramatic one and the dramatic one. In non-dramatic theatre, the performer acknowledges the presence of the audience, but in dramatic theatre, if it is not exactly the case. For example, Karnad's Tughlaq, if we see, Ezekiel's play or Ezekiel's drama, don't call it suicide. This is a play when this is represented on stage. This takes certain other considerations where the questions become extremely open-ended and as far as the characters are concerned, as far as the talking of the characters are concerned, the dialogue somehow they transgress those very realms of those two characters or more than two characters, and they almost come shooting or darting at the audience also. Sometimes reflective in pattern as a part of their performance, and sometimes also, too convoluted and also too direct sometimes, and sometimes too biased, and sometimes also too open-ended. So in any case, understanding the theatrical audience and understanding audience in theater. Why I use the term theatrical also because of the socio-psychological and psychosomatic effect that the plays have as part of the larger audience import. So when we talk about performance in Indian English drama, and we talk about that transit lounge, we talk about these two particular patterns also, where what type of audience we are taking into consideration, that should be noted. If it is for a non-dramatic theatre, the performer who is acknowledging the presence of the audience, either by directly conversing or taking an entry through dialogue from the audience. So there are certain stage directions, stage premonitions that are there, maybe a part of prologue that is dealt with when they are talking within part of the audience, or just entering as characters who are seated from the audience only, and they enter the stage from that portion. So there are multiple forms of experimentation that also goes on in terms of performativity and the performative gestures and performance in general. Now, when we take up this plays, I just give an example of Karnad's Tughlaq, which is a socio-political play and definitely a play of irony and also a play of satire that takes into consideration the post-Nehruvian socio-political and economic impact that we have in India. But at the same time, it goes back and takes into consideration the historiography and also the historical grandeur of Indian history, the power struggle, the system of power, the misuse of power, and several other things like political games, political stances, maneuvering, skillful maneuvering that are done on the part of the people who are in power. And there are themes like justice, there are themes like injustice that is meted out to some people, and definitely there are cases where we talk about questioning the larger system of power, if that is a very convoluted whole that we are looking at. So if we took up or if we take up that proscenium theatre and the development of proscenium theatre and representation as part of that performance, and then also talking about transit lounge as a major juncture, we take up plays like, say, Tughlaq, we take up Ezekiel's Don't Call It Suicide. Deena Mehta, another major woman playwright. We have several women playwrights as part of our study, but we have major ones like Manjula Padmanabhan, we have Usha Ganguly, we have Deena Mehta, who are talking constantly about the different forms of experimentations and newness in terms of understanding the urban landscape or understanding the urban narrative. Deena Mehta's Brides Are Not for Burning. Manjula Padmanabhan has two major plays, in fact, which I was going to say. One is Harvest, another is Lights Out. J.P. Das, he has a play named Absurd Play. All these, 1980s, 1970s onwards, and then 1993, 1997, 1998, although in terms of popularity, if we gauge, if we go to measure, they were not as in terms of what we have been watching in the previous years. But definitely there have been changes, there have been modifications to a larger variety, and modifications which talked about how the Indian audience they are accepting, they're going into the deeper, non-susceptible parts that are associated with drama. And so on the one hand, we find the conflict in Indian English drama that is becoming more intense in terms of understanding the impact of what the characters have to say on stage. So the impact on the impact upon the audience that we are looking at, and on the other part, we are also looking at the different theatrical techniques, the different stage performance narratives, what performances are being generated as and when they are made very different from the script pattern or from the text pattern. So this becomes a site of conflict when we talk about the urban landscape, the elite milieu, the educated milieu, the people who are from the business classes, people who are paying for the tickets, they're coming as larger part of the audience. They're going to schools and colleges, going for higher education, where they have English as one of their modes of communication. And so, what impact does this kind of theatre have in terms of making them understand the linguistic upheaval also? So when we talk about performance, we talk about the Indian English as a term, or the Indian English and its impact also that has a major role to play. Now, just one dialogue, one part of a dialogue rather, that we have, why I told about this transit lounge. And also I'll just go back to, since I talked about Mr. Ezekiel, there is one particular play that we are looking at, and that is Don't Call It a Suicide. And also there is another particular play that I told, that is by Manjula Padmanabhan, that is Harvest. Harvest as a play, as a very postmodern and also a very experimental narrative that we look at. Why I told understanding cityscapes or transit lounge. This experimental narrative becomes more intense, where harvest becomes a kind of post-satellite zone play, and at the same time, not just a modernist aspect, but also it clears all those doubts that are related to the goodness or being good in case of human beings. It's more of a kind of disorganized whole that we find in terms of human relationships in the urban milieu or in the urban landscape that we are looking at. Because Harvest is a play which essentially deals with a very intense and serious subject like organ donation and selling. It becomes a very robotic pattern where we find three characters are there. Guinea is a character who is the wife. Then we have Om is a character who is Guinea's husband, and we have Jitu who is Om's brother. I'm sorry, Om's wife Jaya. She is there, and so these characters, they create a kind of disembodied voice which are coming from the contact module. And what is the contact module? That contact module is created by the corporate office, by the globalized office, where the major character, the main character Om, the man of the house, he becomes an organ seller and an organ donor very unknowingly because of constant unemployment. This is the only job that he could secure. And what he has to do, he gradually drifts apart as a part of the urban landscape or the cityscape. He drifts apart, earns a lot of money. He creates a kind of ruckus in his own relationship, and he is constantly being monitored by an outside power. And that is the harvest that we are looking at, harvesting money, harvesting grief, reaping up the benefits of money, reaping up the benefits of economic prosperity, globalization, but giving away one's own sanity and giving away all the kind of sanctities that we earlier nurtured as a part of any relationship. So we find themes like prostitution is there, organ selling and donation that is there, people drifting apart on stage that is shown through performance that is there. And when constantly Om is awakened by this sense of it's almost like selling your soul to Mephistopheles, what we have seen in Dr. Faustus. And he sells his entire sanity, his entire life to that company for which he works. And interplacenta, that company for which he works, they take away everything that he has almost in lieu of money. So all kind of prosperity, all kind of mental pleasure that was associated with his own relationship, those are given a kind of backseat now. And at a particular point of time, Om says that I know, he says to his wife and he says again to the woman, I know you're stronger than me, you are richer than me, but if you want me, and she also insists, you must risk your skin for me. It is also the husband and wife talking, and also the persons who are talking as part of the narratives from the office. They want donor, they want an organ donor as a part of the modern landscape. The man who is going to office, and what kind of work he does, he has to sell his organs, and he has to be fit for that, and he has no time for his family. So in any case, this particular play takes within a cityscape. This particular play takes within the landscape of the urban narrative that we all have been talking about. The second part that we see how there is this in performance narrative, how there is a gradual shift from individual to familial and to a communal change that is being carried out through performance and through that transit lounge. So if we are looking at all those cultural problems, the topographical problems, the geopolitical shifts that we are seeing in a city or as a part of the city narrative, this is also a point how that narrative or the graph goes up. Or rather, if we see that horizontally, if we are taking that very horizontally or if we are taking that up as a kind of nexus, as a kind of connection that we are taking into consideration, we find there is a movement, a paradigmatic shift that we see from the individual to familial to communal. For example, if we take up Final Solutions by Mahesh Dattani, a particular societal psyche is carried on here, and we find the stage settings are also in consonance with what we see as a part of the psychosocial shift or the societal shift. What is that stage narrative that is carried on as a part of performance? The stage narrative and the setting, they are conceived to amalgamate the multiple layers of the societal, familial, and the historical contours of such a location. For example, the horseshoe-shaped ramp that is created. Horseshoe-shaped ramp that is created as a part of the narrative. What is that ramp that we are making use of? That is in the theatrical domain that we are seeing. That is in the theatrical domain, that is in the production part, that is in the performance part, and therefore that horseshoe shaped ramp or the narrative pattern that becomes visible, that becomes cloistered as a part of the larger Indian English context. Next part, what we see as a part of urban reality in cityscapes. That will be the next part of the study. What is revealed as a part of the cityscape, urban narrative, or even in the performance part or performance narrative that we take up in Indian English drama. What we see as a part of urban reality in the cityscape, we find a kind of experiential, subjective, place-based narrative. And what is that? We see undercurrent, and also we encounter sites, we encounter different types of locales. We encounter a range of intertwining boundaries which turn on cultural, spatial, rhetorical, communicative, and also narrative approach. For example, Pratap Sharma's, as I told you, Pratap Sharma's play A Touch of Brightness, 1964. That is a major play that actually, stirred the hornet's nest, so as to say. That was a very controversial play in Indian English productions that we have, because Pratap Sharma's play Touch of Brightness, that was first written in 1964 after 3 or 4 years, when it was to be taken as a part of the Commonwealth drama narrative. It was to be taken abroad for performance. The government did not actually clear all the sanctions for going out of the country for taking this play, because it essentially talked about those characters who grew in the larger claustrophobic, myopic, urban metropolitan city, but at the same time, it talked about the characters that were part of a brothel, the characters that dreamt, but the characters that talked in a large part, or that talked to a large extent about the red light areas of Bombay. And even when this play was banned, this was essentially 1966. It was banned in 1966 by the court, and also by some of the bodies, those who are into the censorship parts of the plays. Why this was banned? Due to the fact, because it dealt with subjects which should not be depicted on stage. It is a simple part. So then comes the performative aspect, and also the performance is a part of city narrative. How very realistically, what kind of realistic grandeur do we associate, where we actually relate to the representation of the plays on stage? So this becomes very important. Why Pratap Sharma's play A Touch of Brightness, this was banned, because it was not supposed to depict kind of thing that gave almost a kind of negative visage in case of India. So it had a negative impact, and the play was not allowed to be taken in as a part of the Commonwealth narratives or the plays that were to be performed outside India. And in India also it suffered a ban, and the ban was revoked in the year 1972. So even the performance and understanding of the cityscapes, this becomes fraught with so many multiple dimensions, because when it comes to performance and representing on stage and talking about the transit lounge, we are dealing with nothing but a sort of host of questions, a series of questions that essentially do not supply us any close-ended conclusion, any proper satisfactory conclusion, so as to go for a conclusion. The next part that we see in case of the urban narratives, or part of the urban narratives in Indian English plays, what do we see? Class consciousness. How does it become very relevant? class consciousness in place. Say, for example, written by these urban writers and also the urban dramatists. Jeev Patel, who has been writing about the ecological concerns. Jeev Patel as one of the very important dramatists of the early 1960s, and then he has been writing even after that. So Patel has been writing not just about the Gujarati community and also the Parsi community, and there were clashes among them. How he wrote these as part of his plays, but also he wrote about a major part of ecological concerns, eco-critical aspects as part of his plays and also as part of his poems that we find. Jeev Patel has a major play called Mr. Behram. This was written in 1988. When we look at the cityscapes, it talks about not just the clash between ideas, not just the clash between two different communities, but also two people, two types of protagonists that we encounter as a part of the performance who belong to two different areas of the city and also two different areas of the country, so as to be very specific. One comes from a very marginalized section who is a tribal boy who is raised by Mr. Behram, who is a Parsi who is a Parsi by his ethnicity, and how he raises that tribal child and he educates him, he takes care of him, he adopts him, and later on the tribal boy, he becomes his son-in-law. So there is an inherent clash of conflicts, and there is also an ulterior level of latent and non-expressive gestures that lead to a segment called homosexuality as well. So different dimensions that are taken in, not just in Manish Dattani that we find, but also in case of Jeev Patel's idea, where he talks in Mr. Behram about the kind of relationship that becomes intensely fraught with difficulties, complexities, and people are not even aware of what kind of orientation they are enjoying and what kind of orientations they are almost appealing to them, or they are repelling what kind of orientations that is not known to them. So even that becomes a very important dimension of the cityscape. Finally, when we come to certain other plays which are, as I have been discussing, Padmanabhan's Light Out, which centered around rape, Dina Mehta's social tragedies, and also the gendered violence, the kind of domestic violence that we see in Dina Mehta's Getting Away with Murder, which is a very famous play by her and which talks about child abuse also, and a very intense topic, a very serious one like amniocentesis that is discovered in Foil Sengupta's Manjula. In this connection, in Mangala rather, in this connection, it can be pointed out. I'll just read what Louis Watt, a human ecologist, he says about cityscapes or the city narratives or the urban narratives. Louis Watt says, as a part of his cityscapes, so the concept of urbanism, what exactly is meant by the word urbanism, or what do we read in urbanism? He says urbanism as a way of life. He has this essay, very interestingly, which he wrote just 1 year before the outbreak of the Second World War. 1938 is the date that we find, and 1939, as we see, it was the outbreak of the Second World War. So that date is very important, and the year is also very important. 1st September 1939. So 1938, if we see this essay, he writes about urbanism from such a long time, and rather from, if we see, it's a long duration that we take up. What does he say? He observes, I quote, the city is characterized by secondary rather than primary contacts. The concepts and contacts of the city, they may indeed be face to face, but they are nevertheless impersonal, superficial, transitory, and segmental. In fact, superficiality, which looms large, four different segments that we take up from what Louis Watts, an ecologist, and also a person who talks about urbanism. He says one is that the city spaces and the contacts, they must not always have to be face to face. Number one. Number two, they are impersonal in nature to a large extent. Number three, there is an inherent sense of superficiality, which we keep on looking, whether we look into the plays of Mahesh Dattani, Vijay Tendulkar, Silence, the Court is in Session, or else when we look at the plays of Habib Tanvir, which have been translated say major parts, or say when we look at the plays of Girish Karnad, Mohan Rakesh, Badal Sarkar, Usha Ganguly, Dina Mehta, Manjula Padmanabhan, all these plays, if we keep on looking into or looking on through the looking glass to be very specific, if we just dissect, keep on dissecting and analyzing, we find that these superficiality and the superficial gestures and the kind of anomaly and incongruity that is associated with the city life, these become extremely intense and extremely verbal and non-verbal also. Covert and overt, if we are looking at that, they become part of this series as well. Also, there is the transitory nature of social relations, very short-lived. The transitory nature of social relations that are there, and they are the key aspects of understanding urbanism as a way of life to city dwellers. Also, in case of how the setting is looked at, unemployment, the pandemonium that is created through a kind of disheveled conversations, disjointed conversations to be more specific, in case of people, and how this creates a kind of temptation for the people to go on to recreate that stance where they can really get out at some point of time out of this not so very conducive form of city life. That is also what we see. One last example that I'll just give or I'll just refer to from Sonata, Mahesh Kunchwar, how he starts the play, why we talked about transit lounge, why we talked about cityscapes and also urban narratives, how the play starts. Act 1, just only a little portion I'll read. A fine terrace flat in one of the finer suburbs of Mumbai. We are not even talking about the city then, we are talking not about the metropolis also, but we are talking about the suburban part. A fine terrace flat in one of the finer suburbs of Mumbai. The drawing room is filled with fragile, delicate objects, glass tabletops, porcelain objects, the art, crystal vases. It is obvious that only women live here. 3 steps down the drawing room in the terrace. The apron should be used for the terrace. On the left is a door leading to Aruna's room, 2 doors in the back. One leads to the kitchen and the other serves as an entrance to the flat. Between the doors is a wooden cabinet with intricate carving against the wall. The area on stage left has a coffee table and a few low chairs. Upstage on the left is Aruna's working desk and chair and a rocking chair. On the right, another door leading to Dolan's room. Upstage on the right, a sofa, a center table, and a TV facing the cyclorama. Cyclorama is the piece of cloth. It's like a curtain that we have at the back of the stage for the reflection of the light. That's called the cyclorama. That's for theatrical production purpose. Near the door leading to Dolan's room is a small carved table on which is an array of perfume bottles of all shapes and colors. Beyond this, we see the skyline of skyscrapers. It is evening when the play opens. The windows of the skyscrapers will gradually light up and then fade as the play progresses. And then the play starts, Aruna and Dolan on the stage. So on the one hand, we have here as an introductory part the relegation or the how the suburban people or the suburbs in Mumbai or what we call Bombay when we are reading Sonata or when we are watching the play, how the suburbs of Mumbai they're relegated to the background, how still they carry that attention of how to be in the mainstream city life and how the skyscrapers constantly announce the constant growing and devouring of the subaltern, of the marginalized, of the suburban by the larger growing cityscapes and the city spaces. And then the play starts because we see the lights are on, all in boxes, all in box patterns that we see, and the transit lounge also takes place as a part of a dialogue or as a part of the narratorial device. So what we see in case of understanding the cityscapes, in case of understanding the urban narratives, and in order to understand the performances, there is no particular end that we go through, but rather we can conclude, or rather, if we keep this very open ended, I love to keep these discussions open ended because much of the experimentations and researches are still going on as part of Indian English plays and Indian English theatrical production. So, from the perspective of performance, from the perspective of theatricality, from the perspective of the domain-specific ideas that are created in cityscapes and the urban narratorial patterns, we find that they are intertwined. They create a kind of no conventional, or rather non-conventional to be more specific, and not very sustainable impact as part of any specific concluding idea or concluding juncture is to be formed. So why I started, I'll just go back to that particular point from where I started. The transit lounge, it remains as a particular domain in almost all of the Indian English plays that we have. The transit lounge in one's life, the transit lounge as a space, as a site, as a locational, as a geographical skew, that becomes very important because that itself becomes fraught with multiple complexities and multiple dimensions. And the transit lounge also keeps open all the other avenues for the characters that might ensue from there. It might even end up all those avenues that have ended and that have, convoluted and converged at that particular point, which is the transit lounge. So the transit lounge itself, in case of Indian English drama, it can be told to be a kind of amalgamation of all the three prospects that we have been discussing. Urban landscape is there, urban narrative is there, cityscape is there, and also the performance paradigm is there. All three of which they either converge into that transit lounge or else they take a kind of U-turn and they again start from that transit lounge again to tell of a new drama perhaps or a new sentence, a new production, a new idea, and bringing in a new character on stage. So even those three phrases, those three words, those particular terms, and those particular ideas, they remain open-ended as a part of the discussion.
So is it over, ma'am?
Yes, it's over. It's over.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much for this intriguing session. Honestly speaking, the way you have delineated with this transit lounge and the way you have delivered your lecture, it's a really wonderful session for me to host you. And I think that all of the viewers, participants who have watched you, they have gained a lot of information and they learned a lot from your lecture. So we have received so many wishes as well as your presentation is really wonderful. Uh, they have posted their comments and several uh, comments we have received. But your presentation is really wonderful. That most of the participants they have uh, uh, told us through their messages, text, and we haven't received any question right now. So we can. Uh, Okay, everyone is saying that everything is fine. Okay, I'm taking some of the messages so that after within this thing, if we get any kind of question, then definitely we'll take. Else, we'll wrap this session up over here.
Yeah, it's actually one thing that I would like to say. Actually, we ended the session, but this is such a vast domain. If we are taking all the three as part of the consideration, this entirely the Indian English drama, this segment, this is entirely so vast a domain that needs to be
Yes,
cultivated. In all the inadequacies and the adequacies that are still there. So this becomes very important. How we keep this segment or any type of discussion extremely open-ended, which I keep on telling, because it's not just
absolutely,
about the characters and the ideological parts, but it's also about the performance of the character, the role playing, which is constantly changing, definite patterns, postmodernism, modernism, new theories coming in. Everything is
yes,
so very in a convoluted stage, and no definite conclusion can be mated out. What I feel as a part of my
absolutely right.
teaching module also.
I do agree with you. So thank you very much, ma'am, for coming on our platform and delivering this insightful lecture for all of us.
Thank you so
And
much.
but I would like to ask you to be there in the box. Then I would like to talk to you a few words. Then I will leave you. So I'm just taking you, removing you from the main screen. But be there for 1 minute. Then I have some
Okay,
few
okay.
words.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you.
So you have had a wonderful session with Sreetanwi Chakraborty. Ma'am has wonderfully delineated with the topic that she presented. And for you, I have one announcement that we have another session that's going to take place on 4th August with our Nikhila ma'am. Yes, definitely. You might be amazed to know that Nikhila ma'am is going to deliver a second lecture on our platform. And in that lecture, she's going to deal with a narrative in cinema. So to get that one, you have to come on 4th August. And on that day, you will uh, catch this lecture live. So thank you very much for watching this lecture as well as for your relentless support for this venture. I hope that we will keep getting your support in this way. Thank you very much and stay safe, stay protected. Good night for today.